A waitress spoke to the billionaire. "Greetings, sir. My mom owns a ring just like yours. But what unfolded next will astound you. What if a brief exchange in a quaint diner unveiled a mystery that could alter all you believed about kin? What if a ring, merely a ring, turned into the key to mending old scars and revealing hidden truths? This tale speaks of grief, love, and bonds that hold us even when we're unaware. Ethan Caldwell sat in the corner nook of Mabel's diner, a spot where coffee was bold, floors were tacky, and folks were too weary to notice the man in the fine jacket. At 52, he was a tycoon whose name graced clinics and college halls. But tonight, he was just a man sipping a killed mug of coffee, dodging shadows of his past. His wife, Nora, had passed 3 years ago in a crash that stole her joy and left him with a home too vast and a heart too shattered. Since then, he'd swapped boardrooms for backroads, seeking comfort in places where his riches meant little, where tales were raw and true. Mabel's Diner was such a place. Nestled off a quiet highway in upstate New York, it drew truckers, wanderers, and locals who held each other's secrets but kept them unspoken. Ethan liked it here, the worn mugs, faded decor, and the way time seemed to pause. He didn't come for the meal. He came for brief moments of human connection, fragments of others' lives that showed he wasn't alone in his pain. Across the diner, Lydia Harper cleaned a counter, her apron marked with oil and her hazel eyes heavy with fatigue. At 28, she was a lone mother and ex-soldier. Her military days were long gone, replaced by long shifts and a toddler who called her mama with a grin that made it all worth it. Her life was a tightrope. Bills stacking up, a dripping apartment roof, and a heart still sore from losing her mum to addiction years back. Lydia rarely spoke of Ellen, but she carried her mum's memory in a small silver ring she wore owner chain around her neck, etched with a fine vine design, a keepsake of a life that had faded away. Ethan noticed her before she spoke, not because she stood out. She was plain in a way that was lovely for its truth, but for how she moved, like someone who'd learned to presson despite the burden. When she approached his nook to top off his coffee, her voice was gentle but firm. "Greetings, sir. My mom owns a band just like yours," she said, glancing at the silver ring on his right hand. The words were light, but they struck Ethan like a thunderbolt. He froze, fingers gripping the mug. The ring was Nora's, a match to the one he'd given her when they were young and wild, before wealth and loss reshaped their world. It was a plain band with a vine design, a token of a love they vowed would endure all. "What did you say?" he asked, voice low, almost hushed. Lydia paused, sensing his shift. "Your ring," she said, touching the chain at her neck, where her own ring rested. "It's just like my mom's. She wore it always, said it was from someone dear." Ethan's pulse raced. It couldn't be chance. Not the ring, not the vine design, not how her words stirred a buried memory. "Your mother," he said cautiously. "What was her name?" "Ellen," Lydia replied, her tone softening. "Ellen Harper." The name pierced his chest. Ellen Harper, Nora's childhood friend, who'd been there through their youth. The one who'd faded as addiction took over. Ethan hadn't thought of her in years, but now her name pulled him back to a past he'd tried to leave behind. Ethan didn't rest that night. In his hotel room, he sat on the bed's edge, Nora's ring heavy on his finger. Ellen Harper. Her name echoed, dragging up memories of simpler days when he and Nora were just kids in love, and Ellen was the friend who shared their joy and secrets. They'd grown up in the same small town where everyone knew each other and promises felt forever. Ellen had been lively once, with a laugh that could brighten a room and a heart that loved deeply. But life had been harsh to her, poverty, poor choices, and a struggle with addiction that broke her family apart. Ethan recalled the last time he saw Ellen, Athis and Nora's wedding. She'd been sober, or so she claimed, her smile tight but genuine as she hugged Nora and gave her Asmal box. Inside was a twin ring, another silver band with the same vine design, a gift to mark their unbreakable bond. "So you'll always carry me with you," Ellen had said. Nora wore it daily until the crash. But Ellen's life unraveled after that. Nora tried to help. Money, rehab, countless calls. But addiction was a monster that wouldn't release her. Ellen vanished, and Nora never stopped blaming herself for not doing more. When Nora did, Ethan buried that guilt with her, locking away their painful past. Now Lydia's words tore it all open again. The next evening, Ethan returned to Mabel's. He wasn't sure why, only that he needed to see Lydia again, to grasp the link that felt too precise to be random. The diner was livelier tonight, filled with the buzz of voices, but Lydia was there moving between tables with quiet grace. When she saw him, she offered a small smile, but a question lingered in her eyes. "Back again?" she asked, placing a fresh cup of coffee before him. "Couldn't stay away," Ethan replied, keeping his tone light. "That ring you mentioned, it's been in my mind." Lydia's hand touched the chain at her neck, fingers brushing Thering hidden beneath her shirt. "It's all I have of her," she said softly. "She wasn't perfect, but she was my mom." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "Tell me about her." Lydia hesitated, then sat across from him during a rare break in her shift. She spoke of Ellen, how she'd been a singer with a voice that could hush a room, how she'd fought to stay sober for Lydia's sake, but always slipped back into the bottle or worse. How at 16 Lydia came home to find her mother gone. The apartment bare except for the ring and a note, "I'm sorry. I'll keep this safe." Lydia had been alone since, clawing through life, joining the army to escape, only to return to the same town with a daughter, Ava, and dreams that felt ever more distant. Ethan listened, his heart aching with each word. He saw Nora in Lydia's strength, the way she spoke of love and loss with equal weight. But something else gnawed at him, a suspicion. The ring wasn't just a keepsake. It was a clue, a piece of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. Over the next week, Ethan became a regular at Mabel's. He'd sit in the same nook, order the same coffee, and talk to Lydia when her shift allowed. Their talks grew deeper, weaving through tales of loss and survival. Ethan shared bits of his life with Nora, how they'd built a fortune together, but never outran her death's shadow, how he'd given up everything but his grief. Lydia spoke of Ava, a 3-year-old with her grandmother's eyes and the burden of raising her alone. The ring bound them, a thread Ethan couldn't release. He began piecing together the timeline in his mind: Ellen's disappearance, Nora's guilt, the years of silence. One night, after the diner emptied, he asked the question burning in him. "Lydia," he said, voice steady but urgent, "when was your mother born?" She frowned, caught off guard. 1968. Why? Ethan's heart skipped. Ellen was a year older than Nora, but the math didn't add up. Lydia was 28, born in 1997. Ethan and Nora married in 1995. And Nora never mentioned a child, but Ellen was around then. Drifting in and out, a memory flashed. Nora crying after a late-night call from Ellen, saying she'd failed her but refusing to explain. "Lydia," Ethan said, voice barely above a whisper, "did your mother ever mention my wife, Nora Caldwell?" Lydia's eyes widened. "Nora?" "Yeah, she spoke of her sometimes. Said they were like sisters growing up. Mom got sad talking about her, like she'd let her down." Ethan's hands shook. He showed Lydia a photo of Nora, young and smiling, her ring glinting. Lydia's breath caught. "That's her," she whispered. "The Nora my mom meant." The pieces were falling into place, but they didn't fit yet. Ethan needed answers. He hired a private investigator, a discreet man he'd used before, and gave him Ellen's name, Lydia's birth year, and the ring. Days later, the investigator returned with a file that changed everything. Ellen Harper gave birth to Lydia in 1997, but the father listed was a stranger, a drifter who'd passed through Ellen's life. But there was more. A letter in county records from Ellen to Nora. Dated 1996, it was brief but shattering. "I'm pregnant, Nora. It's his. I can't tell him. He's yours now." "I'm sorry." Ethan read it again and again, his world tilting. Nora had known. She knew Lydia was his and kept it hidden. Why, to shield him? Their marriage, or because Ellen begged secrecy? The truth was a deep wound, but also a revelation. Lydia was his daughter. Ethan skipped the diner the next day. He couldn't face Lydia, not with the truth burning in his chest. He paced his hotel room, the letter crumpled in his hand. Anger surged, at Nora for hiding it, at Ellen for running, at himself for missing the signs. but fear outweighed it. Lydia didn't know. She'd grown up fatherless because of choices he never knew he'd made. When he returned to Mabel's, it was late, the diner nearly empty. Lydia was wiping tables, her movements slower, like she carried her own worries. When she saw him, her face brightened, then faltered. "You okay?" she asked. Ethan took a deep breath. "Lydia, we need to talk." They sat in his nook, their rings glinting under the lights. He told her everything: Ellen's letter, Nora's secret, the truth of her father. Lydia listened, face pale, hands gripping Thetable. When he finished, tears streamed down her cheeks, but her voice held firm. "You're saying you're my father?" Sheest, the word strange on her lips. Ethan nodded, eyes wet. "I didn't know, Lydia. I swear I didn't." Silence hung heavy Andro. Then Lydia stood, her chair scraping, and walked out the back door. Ethan didn't follow. He knew she needed space, as he did. Days turned to weeks. Lydia kept working, but avoided Ethan's nook. Her smiles were tight, her words few. Ethan kept coming, not to press her, but because he couldn't stay away. He'd lost too much and wasn't letting go unless she said so. One evening, as snow dusted Mabel's windows, Lydia approached his table. She didn't sit but held out her chain with Ellen's ring. "I've been thinking," she said, "about Mom, Nora, you. I'm angry, so angry. But I don't want to be any more." Ethan looked up, hope flickering. "What do you want, Lydia?" "I want to know you," she said simply. "Not the tycoon, not the man in the fancy jacket, just you. And I want you to know, Ava. She deserves a grandfather." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but a start. Over the next month, Ethan and Lydia rebuilt what was broken before it began. He met Ava, a whirlwind of curls and laughter, and saw Nora in her smile, Ellen in her eyes. He helped Lydia with bills, not as charity but as a father, and she slowly lowered her walls. They spoke of Ellen, Nora, the mistakes and love that shaped them. Ethan funded a community hub in Ellen's name, a place for those battling addiction to find help, honoring the woman who gave him a daughter he never knew. Lydia took night classes, dreaming beyond the diner, and Ethan cheered her on. A year later, Ethan sat at Mabel's, not alone. Lydia was across from him, Ava on her lap, coloring a house with a big tree. Their rings still shone, symbols of a past that hurt but also healed. The diner wasn't changed, but they were, bound by a truth that nearly broke them but gave them family instead. As Ava giggled and Lydia smiled, Ethan felt something new. Peace. The wealth he'd chased, the grief he'd carried, the secrets that defined him were part of him, but not all. The true wealth was here, in Ava's laughter, Lydia's strength, the courage to begin again. As the jukebox played a soft tune, Ethan knew this was what Nora wanted. Not a life of regret, but one of redemption, of love stitched back together. One diner talk at a time. Their bond grew stronger with each visit. Ethan learned Ava's favorite stories, her love for drawing stars and trees, and how her giggles echoed Nora's. Lydia shared more about her struggles, how she'd fought to keep Ava safe, to give her a life better than her own. Ethan listened, not as a tycoon but as a father, his heart swelling with pride and pain for the years he'd missed. He began visiting Lydia's apartment, a small place with peeling paint but filled with warmth. Ava would run to him, calling him Papa Ethan, a name that broke and healed him every time. Lydia, too, began to open up. She spoke of her army days, the discipline that kept her going and the loneliness that followed. Ethan shared stories of Nora's kindness, how she'd always believed in second chances. They laughed over old memories of Ellen's wild spirit, her love for music and her fierce loyalty. But they also grieved together for the years lost, for the secrets kept. Ethan's community hub became a beacon in the town, offering counseling, job training, and hope to those fighting addiction. Lydia volunteered there, finding purpose in helping others, just as Ellen might have wanted. One spring evening, as cherry blossoms fell outside Mabel's, Lydia invited Ethanto Ava's 4th birthday. The diner was closed for the party, tables pushed together, balloons tied to chairs. Locals came, bringing gifts and stories, their faces familiar from Ethan's many nights at the diner. Ava wore a tiny crown, her eyes bright as she blew out candles. Lydia watched, her ring glinting on its chain. And Ethan felt a warmth he hadn't known since Nora. He gave Ava a small silver ring, child-sized with a vine design, a nod to the bond that tied them all. "Lydia," he said later, as they cleaned up, "I don't deserve this chance, but I'm grateful for it." She smiled, softer than before. "We're both starting over, Dad." The word hit him like a wave, but it was a good ache. They weren't perfect. There were still days of anger, of doubt, but they were family. Ethan moved closer to the town, trading his city penthouse for a house with a yard for Ava to play in. And Lydia built routines. Sunday dinners, park visits, quiet nights at Mabel's. The diner remained their anchor, a place where their story began with a ring and a chance conversation. Years later, as Ava grew, she'd ask about the rings, and Lydia would tell her the story, not of pain, but of love found in unexpected places. Ethan would listen, his heart full, knowing he'd found not just a daughter, but a purpose. The past had shaped them, but it didn't define them. Their future was theirs to build. One moment, one memory, one diner at a time.